2nd May 1968. A Green Beret sergeant lay on the ground, his body riddled with 37 wounds. The medics had given up. They zipped him into a body bag, ready to send him home in a coffin. But then, something impossible happened. Roy Benavidez opened his eyes. And what he did next would become one of the most incredible stories of survival and heroism in military history. Welcome to the Real Hero Diaries, where we bring you the true stories of courage that changed the world. This is the story of Master Sergeant Roy Benavidez, a man who defied death itself to save 8 American soldiers from certain doom. Born on 5th August 1935, in a small Texas town near Cuero, Roy Benavidez grew up in extreme poverty. His parents were Mexican-American sharecroppers who worked the fields from sunrise to sunset. By the age of 7, Roy was an orphan. His mother died of tuberculosis when he was just 4 years old. His father passed away 3 years later. Raised by his aunt and uncle, young Roy picked cotton and sugar beets alongside Mexican migrant workers. He dropped out of school in the 7th grade to help support his family. Life was hard. Money was scarce. But Roy learned something invaluable during those difficult years: never give up, no matter how impossible things seem. In 1952, at the age of 17, Roy Benavidez made a decision that would change his life forever. He enlisted in the Texas Army National Guard. 3 years later, he joined the regular army. For a young man who had nothing, the military gave him purpose, discipline, and a chance to prove himself. Benavidez was a natural soldier. He was tough, dedicated, and fearless. In 1965, he volunteered for combat duty in Vietnam. Like thousands of young American men, he wanted to serve his country during one of the most controversial wars in US history. During his first tour in Vietnam, disaster struck. While on patrol, Benavidez stepped on a landmine. The explosion was devastating. Doctors told him he would never walk again. His spine was severely injured. His legs were paralyzed. The army prepared to give him a medical discharge and send him home as a disabled veteran. But Roy Benavidez refused to accept that fate. Every single night, when the hospital staff went home, he would drag himself out of bed. Inch by painful inch, he pulled his broken body across the floor. The pain was unbearable, but he kept going. Night after night, week after week, month after month. Slowly, miraculously, feeling returned to his legs. Within a year, against all medical predictions, Roy Benavidez was walking again. Not only walking, but running. Not only running, but training harder than ever before. He was determined to return to Vietnam. And he wanted to join the elite special forces, the legendary Green Berets. In 1968, Sergeant First Class Roy Benavidez returned to Vietnam as a member of the Studies and Observations Group, a highly classified special forces unit. These were the best of the best, soldiers who conducted the most dangerous missions deep behind enemy lines. On the morning of 2nd May 1968, Benavidez was at his forward operating base near Loc Ninh, South Vietnam, close to the Cambodian border. It was supposed to be a routine day. He was not scheduled for any missions. He was simply monitoring radio communications and preparing for the next assignment. Then, at around 1:30 in the afternoon, the radio crackled with desperate voices. A 12-man Special Forces reconnaissance team had been dropped into the jungle on an intelligence-gathering mission. But something had gone terribly wrong. The team had stumbled into a battalion of North Vietnamese army soldiers. More than 1,000 enemy troops surrounded them. The Americans were outnumbered nearly 100-1. They were pinned down, taking heavy casualties. 3 helicopters had already tried to rescue them. All 3 had been shot down or forced to retreat under intense enemy fire. The situation was hopeless. Those men were going to die in that jungle unless someone did something immediately. Roy Benavidez heard the frantic radio calls. He heard the gunfire in the background. He heard men screaming, dying. And he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Without waiting for orders, without hesitation, he grabbed his medical bag and ran toward the helicopter pad. A helicopter pilot was preparing for one more rescue attempt, even though it seemed like a suicide mission. Benavidez jumped aboard. He carried only his medical supplies and a knife. He didn't even take time to grab a weapon. As the helicopter approached the battle zone, the scene below was pure chaos. The jungle was alive with muzzle flashes. Smoke filled the air. Enemy bullets ripped through the helicopter's hull. The pilot struggled to maintain control as tracers streaked past the cockpit. The helicopter couldn't land. The landing zone was too hot, under too much enemy fire. But Roy Benavidez didn't wait. While the helicopter hovered 10 feet above the ground, he jumped out into hell itself. He hit the ground running. Immediately, he was struck by enemy fire. A bullet tore through his leg. He kept running. Another bullet hit his face, and another hit his head. Blood poured down his face, but he didn't stop. He ran 75 yards through open ground, through a hailstorm of bullets, to reach the trapped soldiers. What happened over the next 6 hours was nothing short of miraculous. Despite his wounds, Benavidez took command of the desperate situation. He organized the survivors. He administered first aid to the wounded. He retrieved classified documents from dead soldiers, documents that could not fall into enemy hands. The enemy was everywhere, closing in from all sides. Benavidez called in air strikes on his own position, bringing devastating fire danger close to drive back the enemy assault. He distributed ammunition to the remaining soldiers. He dragged wounded men to a small defensive perimeter. Then he made multiple trips back and forth across 75 yards of open ground, through continuous enemy fire, carrying wounded soldiers to the helicopter one by one. Each trip, he was hit again and again. Bullets struck his arms, his legs, his back. Shrapnel from grenades tore into his body. But he refused to stop. At one point, an enemy soldier charged at him with a bayonet. The blade plunged into Benavidez's stomach. In hand-to-hand combat, wounded and bleeding, Benavidez killed his attacker with his bare hands and a knife. He was shot in the thigh, shot in the back, shot in the abdomen. A grenade exploded near him, sending metal fragments deep into his body. His intestines were exposed. He held them in place with one hand while continuing to fight and rescue soldiers with the other hand. For 6 hours, Roy Benavidez fought like a man possessed. He refused to give up. He refused to die. And most importantly, he refused to leave a single man behind. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, all the surviving soldiers were loaded onto the helicopter. Benavidez climbed aboard last, still clutching classified documents in his bloody hands. As the helicopter lifted off, he collapsed. When they reached the base, medics rushed to help the wounded. Roy Benavidez lay motionless on the ground. His body was covered in blood. He had been shot at least 7 times. He had been stabbed twice. Shrapnel had hit him in multiple places. In total, he had sustained 37 separate wounds. A medic checked for a pulse and found none. A doctor examined him and declared him dead. They placed his body in a body bag and zipped it up. Roy Benavidez was being prepared for the morgue. But then, from inside that body bag, the impossible happened. Roy Benavidez, with his last ounce of strength, spit in the doctor's face. It was his way of saying, "I am not dead yet." The doctors rushed him into emergency surgery. They worked for hours. Multiple blood transfusions. Multiple surgical procedures. Nobody expected him to survive. But Roy Benavidez refused to die. He spent months in the hospital recovering from his catastrophic injuries. Doctors performed multiple surgeries. He endured agonizing physical therapy. Slowly, painfully, he healed. For his actions on that terrible day in May 1968, Roy Benavidez was initially awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor. But those who witnessed his heroism knew it deserved more recognition. Years later, in 1981, after eyewitnesses came forward with detailed accounts of his extraordinary courage, the award was upgraded to the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. On 24 February 1981, President Ronald Reagan presented the Medal of Honor to Master Sergeant Roy Benavidez in a ceremony at the Pentagon. During that ceremony, President Reagan called Benavidez's story an extraordinary tale of bravery. He said, "If the story of his heroism were a movie script, you would not believe it." Roy Benavidez had saved 8 American lives that day. 8 men went home to their families because one man refused to give up, refused to quit, refused to let them die. Roy Benavidez retired from the army in 1976 after serving his country for 20 years. He spent the rest of his life speaking to young people about patriotism, courage, and the importance of never giving up. He traveled across America, visiting schools and military bases, sharing his incredible story. He wrote a book about his experiences titled Medal of Honor, One Man's Journey from Poverty and Prejudice. In it, he wrote, "I don't like to be called a hero. The real heroes are the ones who gave their lives for their country." Roy Benavidez passed away on 29 November 1998 at the age of 63. But his legacy lives on. His story continues to inspire new generations of Americans. It reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite that fear. 2nd May 1968. 1 man. 37 wounds. 8 lives saved. 6 hours that defined heroism itself. This is the story of Master Sergeant Roy Benavidez, the man who refused to die. If this story inspired you, subscribe to the Real Hero Diaries for more incredible true stories of courage and sacrifice. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. And remember, heroes walk among us every day. Sometimes, they just need someone to tell their story. Until next time, never forget the price of freedom, and never stop believing in the power of the human spirit.